I'm Dory Chattel. I am Executive Director of the nonprofit Medical Education Institute. And if you all are not aware, we have a Facebook group called the Home Dialysis Central Facebook discussion group. Some of those folks are here, but you don't have to be in that group to be on this webinar. You can be on Zoom, but you might like the group. So in case you didn't know about it, there's a group. This webinar is being sponsored by our sponsor, Fresenius, and we are very pleased to have their support. And we are recording this. I mentioned that, but if you came in a little bit late, we're recording this session. If you don't want your video to be recorded by accident, turn your video off, and that's fine. And we'll probably ask most questions by way of the chat. And we're going to talk about different kinds of emergencies and what it's like to live through some of those and how to get ready for them. And the point of this isn't necessarily to tell you every single thing that you should do to get ready for an emergency. It's really more to just kind of put in your head to think about the kinds of emergencies that happen where you live, because they're different in different parts of the country, and give some thought to getting ready for the kinds that might pop up on your doorstep. And we hope that none of them do. Nobody wants any emergencies, but they do happen. And I've had several different types, and I'm not even on dialysis. So, we would really love to hear from you all also, like, what have you done? What kinds of emergencies have you gotten through? What worked and what didn't work? That's kind of what we want to talk about. So I'm going to kick this to Vanessa to introduce herself, and then she can kick it to Lyndsay, and then we'll get Martine and Jessie, our guest dialyzers, along with Vanessa, and learn what y'all are up to. So I just was going to say, maybe when you introduce yourselves, say a little bit about what kinds of emergencies there are in your area. So I'm in Maryland, and we can get 2 feet of snow. We can get hurricanes, and we have a tendency toward flooding. So we've flooded more than once. Those are our typical-ish emergencies. So take it, Vanessa.
Okay, well, Dory, thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Vanessa Evans. I am the Senior Manager of Advocacy at Fresenius, but more importantly, I'm a dialysis patient myself. I've been on dialysis for 25 years, long time. And I live in the Northeast, so there's a lot of snow here for sure. I live near the ocean, so there can be flooding. So I have to, be careful with flooding and such. And just in general, we've had power outages. I've actually had no water, so algae blooms when you can't use the water, like things that you might not even think of that are everyday occurrences that happen, that sometimes just happen in your area as well. So I am going to introduce Lyndsay.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Lyndsay, and I work with the Clinical Services Initiatives team for Fresenius Kidney Care. And I live in Montana, so we have our own world of disasters. We have earthquakes, we have ice storms and a lot of snow. And as I'm sure maybe some of you have heard, we have flooding, like in Yellowstone. It's been some pretty intense flooding out there lately. And we have fires. We have a lot of, we call it the fire season, basically, because of how that works out here. So I have been working in the home dialysis field since 2011. So that's me. Thank you for having me here today. And I would like to introduce Jessie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jessie Rodriguez. I live in Chicago, and very similar to what was mentioned earlier, except I'm not by the beach. We definitely have tornadoes that can be quite severe. And also as a result of that, there can be electrical failure. And also when sometimes it rains here, it rains a lot. And so there's flooding. I live in an old 2-flat apartment. My supplies is in the basement. So I always make sure to have a couple of days of emergency supplies in case the basement's flooded or I don't have access to the basement. But that's pretty much it. Yeah.
That's enough. That's
Yeah.
enough, right? Martine, can you introduce yourself too? Oh, Martine, we don't hear you. Oh, no.
Oh, how's your microphone?
Martine, maybe turn your sound up. Because you're not muted, but we can't hear you.
Well, now you're muted though, Martine.
Yeah.
And yep, you're muted still, Martine. There you go. Try now.
Uh-oh.
Where the mute button is on your screen, there should be an upwards arrow. If you click that arrow, it'll say select a microphone, and then you can, so the microphone in the lower left corner of your screen, and then try to pick the
Does that work?
microphone.
Yes,
Yes.
it did work. So now we
Yay.
hear
That
you.
work?
Perfect.
Yes.
So
Awesome.
now you can introduce yourself.
All right.
Thank you
My
for the tech
name
support,
is
Lyndsay.
My name's Martine Zaun, and I live in the Northern California.
Uh-oh.
I think,
I've
Martine, you're a
been
little
on
delayed with your,
dialysis for 8 years.
so Martine, I don't know if you can hear me, but you're a
I
little
grew up in
delayed.
California,
with
so
your
I'm speak
computer.
slower. And power. It's my internet.
Yes, your
I don't know what to
internet
do about that.
is a little slow.
The internet.
How close
Well,
are
that's
you?
another emergency.
I know, right? Because we need internet. Martine, how close are you to your
Yes.
router?
I'm in another room.
Is it maybe possible to go in the same room?
I
That might help.
can give it a try while you go on to someone else, or
Yeah, okay. All right, and we'll have you introduce yourself again because it was going slow enough that we couldn't quite hear you, but what we really want to hear what you have to say.
all right.
All right, we'll let Martine get reshuffled. So Jessie, you keep a couple of days of PD supplies upstairs is what I'm saying.
Right.
You keep
Right.
a couple days upstairs and then you've got all the rest of it downstairs. So
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
use up the
Almost-
upstairs stuff, you go down and replenish that.
Yeah. I leave the two in the close by my bedroom so that I don't have to leave the apartment. But my regular supplies is 2 flights down in the basement.
Okay. So when they deliver those, they will take them down, stack them up in the basement, put them where
Yeah.
you want them. And you have them off the floor. Are they just on the floor or are they like on a shelf above the floor?
They're on 2x4s.
Yeah.
On the floor.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's
So
a little
not
bit of
right
yeah,
down. I'm
exactly.
just, like I said, I am not on dialysis, but our basement floods and even our freezer that we have down there is up on cement blocks 8 inches off the floor because we don't really trust our basement at all. Basement's not always trustworthy. So
I go tell
Yeah.
Rebecca that I'm in the living room now.
So I have a couple of days of supplies to use the machine, but if there should be a time when there's no electricity as well, I always have my manuals too. I mean, there's smaller bags.
right.
So I have a box, which is enough for a day.
Yeah. And how often do you get retrained on manuals to make sure that you remember how to do that?
Well, I have a cheat sheet
Nice.
right here. It's like a trifold, which I always take with me whenever I travel. So it's nice because it has all of the illustrations.
That is
Step
nice.
1 to step 2.
Yeah.
So this, even if I'm familiar and I feel familiar and I feel like I don't need it, I always reference this. It goes
You know,
wherever I go, whenever I travel.
It's
That's
like
really
a
good. And
flight checklist. I love
Mhm.
things like that because I think
Yeah.
that sometimes people get a little complacent and think they know the steps, but it's easy to miss one.
And it's
something
for
that
Fresenius, so it's for Fresenius. So if,
Lyndsay, I'm wondering if, so Jessie is a PD patient.
Mhm.
Let's start by talking about that. So Jessie is a PD patient and he does use a cycler, during his normal treatments. But when he travels, he does CAPD, and more importantly, he's ready for an emergency with CAPD. And what he was just referring to is kind of a quick reference guide that his provider has put out for him that shows him the steps. And I feel like, Lyndsay, this would be a great time to bring you in to just talk a little bit about, how do you do, what if you're a PD patient and you don't know how to do CAPD? Can you tell people really what is CAPD? What if you don't know how to do it? Like maybe a little bit about the training. It's particularly in emergency situations where people might just be using the cycler and not remember or know about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it is important to know how to do manuals as a backup for emergency purposes or traveling. I think that's fantastic because you have substantially less things to pack with you when you're going somewhere, when you're on taking manuals. If you don't remember how to do manuals, it's a good idea. I would suggest go check with your clinical team and
Mhm.
ask for that support. Hey, remind me real quick. Something that's really great about manuals in an emergency situation is, if you don't have power, it is still safe to use your manual bags, even if it's cold. It doesn't feel good, but it's safe, which is great that you still have that safety piece to doing your dialysis. And having those backup supplies, it's a good idea. I still suggest to check to make sure that they're not expired. Check those every 6 months and get them replenished if they are getting close to that expiration date. And
Good point.
to check them and have them. Always have at least, I say 5 to 7 days worth of supplies available in that emergency stock, wherever that lives. Because you never know how long you're going to be without power or what the situation is. And so having a week's worth of supplies is really helpful for that.
Well, I had a recent situation where they were backlogged.
Oh yeah, that was happening all over.
They were backlogged, but I always have 10 extra boxes. So I always have 10 extra boxes for 10 days just in case. I mean, not knowing that, we feel so secure and it's so reliable. So when they called me to let me know, they were alarmed, and I said, no, don't worry about it. I'm good. I mean, it was going to be delayed for a week, but I had enough for 10 days. So it worked out.
That is really good.
Yeah.
That's
Let's
fantastic.
let Martine introduce herself again now that she has moved and see if it is better.
All right, does this work? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I hear you much better.
Okay. Northern California, in the mountains above Santa Cruz, is where my house is. I've been on home hemodialysis for 8 years. The things I look out for are earthquakes and wildfires. Again, we have a season here. If you go down to the beach, there are signs for tsunamis, but I've never seen one. And
That's
power
scary.
outages. Yeah, power outages and rock slides is mostly what I deal with.
Wow. Rock slides did not even occur to me. Mudslides too. I mean, depending.
They close the roads.
Right. Oh yeah, closing the roads. That affects y'all in ways that don't even necessarily have to do with the emergency directly.
Yeah.
Right.
And we were talking about this in our practice session, but that can go on for weeks.
Right.
Road
And
blockages,
I
trees
think
down, things like that.
that's a great time to talk a little bit. Martine had like a particularly difficult time where living in California, so Martine is a home patient, a hemodialysis patient, and living in California, and there were wildfires that went on, and she had to, evacuate very quickly, and wasn't really able to take her stuff, but evacuated, I think it was for like 24 hours. And Martine, please correct me if I'm wrong, but when you came back, it wasn't like it was all clear. There was a problem with the water and the roads were closed. So Martine, can you talk to us a little bit about what your experience was like, A, with the evacuation, and then B, just coming home and trying to get settled into a routine doing home hemodialysis?
Yeah, Vanessa. We were evacuated at midnight. So, of course, your brain is not fully functioning in that hour. They told us we had about 15 minutes to get out. When we went to bed, the fire was miles away. So this came as a complete surprise to us. You could see the flames from our back door. So we're like frantic. I've got 4 people, kids and husband, that we packed everything up. We found the important papers, knew where we were going, and got in 2 cars and left. We looked at the machine and we both shook our heads saying, we can't do that. We know it takes like 10 to 15 minutes to break that apart, get all the supplies, get it in the car. We just made the decision that we would go to the hospital if we had to. We would find a center if we had to, but we couldn't take the machine with that little amount of time to get it.
Yeah, no, that's totally understandable. And you do the next stage machine where it is portable, but when you have 15 minutes to get out in the middle of the night in an emergency, you're on the go and you're on the run. But so you left, and thank God you and your family are safe. And we're safe. So that's important to note. But when you got back, it wasn't business as usual. So tell me about that.
Well, number one, we were out of our house for 3 weeks. And so it wasn't 3 days, 2 days, it was 3 weeks we couldn't go back.
Wow. Yeah.
So once we got back, there are ashes everywhere. I did have a week's supply of hanging bags, but there's no power, there's no water, there's no food to be had except for what we had in the house. And so luckily, I have a great support staff, but you know what? They were all evacuated also. And so between all of us, we figured out how this would all work. I do have a generator, so that was good. And I had enough bags, and that was good. But even within that time when we came back, I had to have my prescription changed to deliver a truckload of bags because I couldn't use the water.
Right. But that, I think you're bringing up a lot of important points that, people may or may not think about in an emergency. If there's a big emergency, not only are you evacuated, but so is your whole team, right? Your whole healthcare team, right. And everybody's kind of worried about
depending on the emergency. If it's an area-wide emergency, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what did you do to get treatments? Where did you end up going? And how did you find your way to where you were supposed to be?
Well, luckily I had just dialyzed that day. So I know my body, I can last 2 days without. The minute I was settled in the place I was staying, I called my support team and said, hey, I'm not home. What do I do? Where can I go? They actually found me a center within a mile from where I stayed. I did have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get there on time, but you know what? I'm alive and safe and happy and healthy, and I was done by 10. So, without that support staff and a variety of places they called, they set it all up, I was good to go.
Martine, I'm just wondering, now that you went through this, so a couple of things. So you had to leave and you were able to get dialysis in another clinic, right, with your support staff. And then we talked about how when you came home, you still didn't have power, and the water supply you couldn't use. So you are lucky you do have a generator. and you had hanging bags so that you were able to dialyze. And how long did you dialyze using the hanging bags on the generator?
Almost a month,
Yeah.
pretty close to 3 more weeks.
Well, that is a pretty amount of time. And I have to tell you, after like hearing your story, it also made me think about planning for emergencies. I think kind of like what Jessie said earlier, sometimes we take for granted, maybe not lately with supply chain and the way things have been going in general, but you do tend to just kind of live in your space where you get your supplies delivered and it's day to day kind of dialysis. But in the space that we're in now, you really do want to think about planning. And so I'm wondering now, after you went through this event, are you planned for another emergency? Like, how did you plan, and what do you have now in terms of for backup?
I have 2 weeks worth of all those little things you use during treatment in a bag, along with 2 bags of saline and the needles and all of that. It sits right by the door. My husband and I have talked about it. I will get the kids ready and my emergency supplies. On the way out, we can stop in the basement and get the hanging bags. So we can do that within about 8 minutes now.
Wow, you've like timed yourself.
We practice.
That's an emergency drill. That makes
Well,
perfect
it's true.
sense.
It's like when you're little and they tell you if there's a
Yeah.
fire, where are you all gonna meet,
Yep.
I think for dialysis patients, you really need to think about that. And I know that one of the things that I do is I have a checklist, and it tells me all the supplies that I need, but I also use this checklist actually even for travel. And I keep everything in one duffel bag, and it has all of those ancillary supplies that you need, because it's the little things too that you might need. I myself am an HHD patient, so obviously it will vary from patient to patient. But I keep all of that stuff in a duffel bag, and then I can grab my boxes for what I need. You hear my dog in the background, so I apologize, but I can grab my boxes and take them on a go if I need to. And in the past, I don't know that I would have thought about doing things like that, but the way that things have been and just in general, I think it's really important. I'm wondering if we can bring Lyndsay in just to ask you a little bit about how do you prepare your patients, whether it's an HHD patient or a PD patient, in terms of emergency.
Absolutely. And in agreement, I think that practice is really key. And the fact that you timed it down to 8 minutes that's phenomenal. And I admire that. And hearing this story reminded me of another situation that we had with an HHD patient in Montana who had 2 weeks worth of backup supply bags that were kept in the garage and froze. And when the bags are frozen, you can't use them. So knowing, keeping the supplies in a safe place where you know where they are, grab and go bag, it's hugely important. But we talked expiration of supplies and keeping your backup supplies in a safe place. There's also having that checklist. There's a great checklist on the KCER website that is really great for everybody to use. It's the emergency preparedness checklist and tips. And I think what's important to know is the name of your dialysis facility and who's the backup. The clinic can tell you who their backup is or their sister clinic is. If everybody at one clinic has been evacuated themselves, where can people go if they need to, if the clinic is not up and running? So finding that backup, who are you talking to? Who are you going to call? Family, your nurse, and having your prescription written down somewhere. Vanessa earlier mentioned, or maybe it was Martine, I'm sorry, that grabbed all the papers and grab your paperwork. a lot of that's the personal, but also it's your medical, it's your list with all of your medicines on it. And I think that that's a really good piece. I think, Vanessa, I kind of said a whole bunch of things. I'm not sure that
Yeah, no,
answered.
I think that's super helpful. And somebody wrote like a good comment, and I think Dory's gonna go in and read some of the comments here because we're getting really good chat on the Facebook. And yeah,
this
go ahead,
one
Dory.
is, I think, Jessie, you might want to comment on this, but Molly said, my name is Molly Cesaretti, and I'm a home dialysis social worker, MSW, living in Minnesota. Cold, so cold. And I practice in Wisconsin. I had a thought when Jessie was talking about his emergency supply of manual exchange supplies and checking them every 6 months to ensure they aren't expired. In order to keep your manual exchange skills fresh in your mind and decrease the number of supplies wasted due to expiration, a home PD patient could use the manual supplies before they expire. And by using them regularly before the bags expire, even in a non-emergency, they can refresh their memory for the manual exchange process. So that I thought sounded like a good suggestion. Like, there's only 1 week left on these bags. How about if I use them now and refresh my memory and not throw them,
Well, yeah, and that's a good point. And so generally, if I take a trip for a weekend, I won't take the machine. I'll do it manually. If I'm taking a trip for a week or longer, then I'll take the machine and then have them ship. But also there are times when I have a late night and and then the next day a very early morning. So I won't do the machine, but I'll do the manuals when I come back the next day. So that's how I keep everything from being.
How long is your cycler prescription?
10.5 hours.
Yeah, I could totally see how there would be days when manuals would make more sense.
It interrupts. Yeah. But if I have that option, then it's not such an inconvenience,
You
Dory,
do
I
a
just
daytime exchange. Yeah, do you do daytime exchange too?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, only in those cases
Only, okay.
where I have to.
Sometimes it's possible to have a shorter cycler prescription if you
Mhm.
add
Yeah.
daytime exchange.
You
and
could always do
people-
that too. You can just
People
wake
vary.
up after one of the drain cycles. You can just turn it off because I do five cycles. So I would just do 3 or 4.
Yeah. Okay.
Cut it off and then turn the machine off.
And Dory, I think that's such a good point that he's bringing up, because if you do have an emergency, supplies may be an issue, right? May or may not be an issue on depending where you are. So it's really important to preemptively talk with your healthcare team to understand that if there is an emergency and you have to leave your home and you're a home patient, whether you're PD or HHD, and you're taking your machines on the go, can you change your prescription, right? And what would it look like so that maybe you're using less supplies for a day or 2 while you're away? And you don't want to start messing around with things and not know. So these are good questions and discussions that you should be having with your healthcare team preemptively, to say, God forbid, if there is an emergency and I just had to leave my house or something happened, what do you suggest an alternative prescription might be for me? And also, you might want to think about, almost like when you do for a fire, we're all going to meet in front of the tree or blah, blah, blah. You want to know, where is it that you're going? And have, if we need to go north, do we go north? Do we go south? And let those people know you're coming with a machine and supplies. And it might even be a good idea. I mean, if they're a good friend of yours, you could even maybe leave a small bag at their house. It just has a couple of maybe even your ancillary supplies. So you're just taking a couple of boxes. I really think that there's a lot of creative ways that you can prepare if it was something a little more sudden, right?
The other thing that I think is interesting for folks in the group, because we've seen this a lot over the years, is the Facebook group has, I think, 6,700 people now. So there are folks all over the US and in other parts of the world. And sometimes when people travel and they forget something, somebody else can help them, but they might also be a network for each other in cases of area-wide emergencies where, you know, you're in one state and somebody's across the border in another state and they're far enough away that they're not affected, you know, and they've got the supplies that you need and whatever, it might be possible to ask in the group, you know, as a backup. Just a thought. There was a comment and that came from the Facebook group, and I think Martine could answer this one for us, hopefully, or Lyndsay possibly. For home hemo, what size generator would be needed for power for the machine? I think that's a great question. And how much space is needed for extra bags and supplies when you can't use water, like after a hurricane or, you know, a fire or whatever? And I wanted to add one more question to that, which is, you said you had 1 week of bags on hand, but you used them for a month. How did you get that other 3 weeks worth? How did that work?
That had to be ordered, the extra bags. And like I said, I had to have my nurse change my prescription for the next month into bags instead of pure flow. So my support group again came into play, and it was done with no problems at all. The generator, I don't have the specifics in front of me, but I know it lasts for like 15 to 20 hours. The only thing is, in an emergency, you have to line up at the gas station or find a gas station every other day to fill that tank again.
So you have a gasoline, not a propane generator.
Right.
Okay. Is it a Honda?
No, we have whatever Amazon stole at the time, you know.
Oh, did you buy it in an emergency when they were hard to get?
No, a friend of mine let me borrow one for a year, a Honda, and those are great, but they're very expensive.
They are very quiet and very pricey. Yep.
Right. So Costco, we looked around for the best deal at the time. No, we got this because our power does go on and off a lot here. The wind blows, the power's knocked down. A tree falls, the power's out.
A squirrel.
So we just pre-thought that and bought one when we could.
Good plan. But you know, another thought is, if there's any chance that you think you might need a generator, the time to buy a generator is not when you desperately need a generator, because then everybody around you also, this is like snow blowers. You don't want to wait until there's a 2-foot snowfall to buy your snowblower. If you need a snowblower, buy it in the summer if you can, except they don't sell them then. But, you know, buy a generator, do your homework, buy a generator before, and be sure you know how to use it safely. It has to be outside. It has to be ventilated. People have died using generators the wrong way. And I'm a safety freak. So, you know, a generator's gotta be, yeah, exactly. There is something called a car generator, which is interesting. It's not really a generator. It's really a way to use the alternator and the gas tank of your car. And they can be less expensive because you're not buying the whole motor. You're using your car's motor. You're also running down your car's gasoline. So if you only have one car, you really need to be careful. But it doesn't seem like it uses much. And it's possibly an option for some folks. And they're small because they don't have to be the size of a whole generator.
Yeah. And I would just say, like, for anything like that, you should always check with your healthcare team, you know, just to see, like, is this okay? Is it safe to use like this? I would just want to make sure of that. I do want to answer the other part of her question. And Lyndsay, as clinician, you can probably answer as well, which was how much space do you need for your bags? And this is an interesting question because everybody is different. If you're talking about HHD, home hemodialysis, right? We're all very different. So some people might do nocturnal, some people might do short daily, and a lot of it is going to depend on your access. It's going to depend on your blood flow. It's going to depend on like what your average weight is to remove. Like there's a lot of factors that are involved. So that's why that's like kind of a hard question to answer, in that you have to look at your specific prescription. I bet you Martine and I, who are both HHD patients, are very different. And then if you compared it to Jessie, it might be totally different, who's a PD patient. So I think, you know, if I was to lead, I know that monthly and this is my own personal prescription, but monthly I get about maybe 12 or 13 boxes. But I'm not always getting like the hanging bags, right? Because that would be an emergency piece. So you'd have to look to see how many liters you process for HHD to then figure out how many boxes you would need. And I would try to calculate about a week away, or at least 2 or 3 days away, until you can get to maybe a safe space where more supplies can be sent to you. And that's, really what ended up happening with Martine. I mean, she was gone for 3 weeks because she couldn't get back to her house. But when she was able to get back to her house, she still couldn't use the water or electricity, and then had supplies, delivered to her with a prescription change, right?
Mhm.
So that's important.
And from
Oh, go ahead.
from
You know
my
what?
experience, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to give a visual. My supplies for that month would take up a small bathroom.
Wow.
And that's
I was
how
gonna
much
say
I would
something
need.
similar. Yeah, you're right,
Yeah.
Martine, exactly. And from the few home visits that I've been on, I usually figure about a sliding closet's worth,
Wow.
floor to ceiling, sliding closet's worth of space.
I was gonna just throw in there, because I know that Nilcha uses this tip. You don't necessarily have to keep the supplies in a box. In the box is probably the least, it's probably the worst use of space, because the boxes themselves take up so much space. What Nilcha will do is take the bags out of the boxes and put them in dresser drawers or under the bed bins, or you could even put them in like, Rubbermaid tubs, like
They
Jessie.
have the Tupperware like rolling tubs that you can
Yes,
put them in.
or Rubbermaid. Costco has some great heavy duty plastic tubs, so that even, if your supplies were inside one of those tubs in the basement, that water would have to get up about 18 inches before your supplies would even get wet,
Mhm.
which is maybe a plus, but I mean, various tubs are available, but that's a way to reduce the amount of space that they take up. But then you got to figure out some way to let yourself know on the outside of the tub what's in there and when does it expire. So
Yeah.
It puts a little bit more onus on you to, put Post-it notes on it or adhesive tape and write on it or whatever.
Yeah, if you have some kind of like a list and you have the dates of expiration, I think that's helpful. I think it's also helpful to think about things that you need to pack. And I thought I would just talk to you a little bit about some of like the supplies that I pack they're not what you would think of as dialysis supplies, but they're supplies that you might end up needing in case of an emergency, or I even use them sometimes when I travel. So
Duct
there's
tape?
really, what's that? Duct tape. Actually, that is not on my list, but that is a good one.
I
So
hear it can be very handy in a number of circumstances.
Okay, so that could be one. The duct tape, which I could see maybe why you would want to use that. But the other three that I was thinking of is one is a screwdriver, just because sometimes if you move your machine, things might get loose, and I'm not like you're asking to fix anything, but like
Phillips or regular.
just a regular little Phillips type thing. And the biggest piece that I like to have is scissors. That's helpful for cutting open like bags and supplies. And then the other one is a little wrench, like a small wrench, because sometimes things can get, it can be hard to like open a, like the saline thing, or one of the, like your cartridge, one of the tubes might be tight and might be difficult to open. So I do find that having those like little ancillary supplies can help you when you're on the go and when you're traveling. So I think that, those might be things that you might not think of in terms of all the things that you need for supplies. And then things that I never thought of before is, even in an emergency, I have a COVID test. Like I would put those, portable COVID test in your bag. If you need it, you have it. I think that is important. And then I always make sure to have obviously for me, it's like needles, gauze, gloves, masks, like you need the face mask. Yep. You need the face mask. And then importantly, you should know your prescription. So if for whatever reason, you have to change your prescription or you have to change it literally in the machine. You want to be able to know what your numbers are and have a list of all your doctors, clinics, and your care team, phone numbers, email address, etc. Like things that you might not think of. I feel like nowadays we all have it on our phone. But you might want to also just have it written out in case, I don't know, your phone doesn't work, you have to use a landline. It's amazing how like we're so used to the cell phone that if it doesn't work and you want to call somebody, I don't know about you guys, but I don't know anybody's number anymore because I can just press it, right? So having an actual list written out, it's a little old school, but if in an emergency and you don't have your cell phone and you need to make a phone call, you want to have those numbers.
Vanessa, I bring a power strip because even
yeah.
if you go to a hotel, the plugs are on two different sides of the room and they won't come together to your machine. And you never know where the plugs are.
Some hotels are much better equipped with outlets than others. Some is like there's one in the room and that's it.
Right. So
I was
power strip.
gonna ask Jessie, when you travel, do you take an IV pole with you, or what do you do to hang up?
No, I don't take an IV
I didn't
pole.
think so. So how do you make that work?
I usually hang it from like a closet. I usually get a hanger
Okay.
and manipulate the hanger so that it hooks up. And then I just do it that way.
I was gonna suggest that maybe just S hooks or carabiners from the hardware store might be a handy thing to throw in a PD kit to just make it a little easier, maybe to hang those bangs up to,
as long as it's tall enough so that the gravity
yeah,
goes
exactly
into your stomach, then you're fine. Yeah.
I mean, with an S hook, if it's a big enough S hook, you could just even hang it on the edge of a door.
Right, that too.
Or not even an S hook. In that case, there are closet hooks that are meant to go over the door and hang things from, and
I've used that as
pretty
well.
cheap. Yeah, those would be handy.
It's never an issue.
Yeah, good.
And there are foldable IV poles too, portable, right? So like you get an IV pole that is portable that you can break it down.
Foldable IV pole. I had no idea. What a cool idea.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Absolutely. There is all of that. I mean, I speak with your healthcare team to see what you have and what you can get. But even with our next stage machine, with our IV pole, it's retractable. It's portable, and they have ones that are, on wheels, etc. So I think that knowing like what your options are and working with your healthcare team to make up your emergency bag is probably something that we all should be doing now.
I am in the chat right now putting a link to some of the CASER ideas. And Nancy Verdon said, when I did CAPD, I used overdoor hooks and a telescoping tent pole my dad adapted. That is clever.
That's really neat. I like that.
I have telescoping marshmallow sticks now for when we grill out. They are so cool. I think all those old car antennas that, they don't make them that way anymore. They've turned them into things like tent poles and marshmallow sticks, and they're really helpful.
When we were talking PD earlier, and Vanessa, you were talking about your things to pack, and we were both agreeing on the mask. Something that I've really shared with my teams a lot is still putting that prevention of infection out there when you're in an emergency situation, because the last thing you want to deal with when you are in that emergency is an infection, peritonitis, bloodstream infection, anything like that. That's just one more thing to not deal with, to avoid in that situation. And the mask, the hand sanitizer, or those wipes, hand wipes. Keep something like that in that go bag so that you can clean the end of your PD catheter, or in your hands, and making sure that you're masked and not breathing on it. And an antibiotic kit, if you have an antibiotic kit, make sure you have that, because goodness.
Yeah, I think
do those expire?
They do.
Oh, well,
Yep.
they probably do if they're an antibiotic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
would
feel
think
like,
so.
Lindsay, you're bringing up good points, because also when you are in an emergency, you're frazzled a little bit because you're not in your space. And you might like forget to do steps. And so you don't want to do that, right? Like you want to
Right.
actually be the complete opposite. You want to be
Mhm.
hyper vigilant about everything that you're doing, and make sure you're following the aseptic technique and all those pieces that you learned when you were training. But put yourself in another space, that can be hard, which brings me to like maybe one recommendation. And I say this to people that travel too, but you want to be prepared and you want to be ready. And one of the things that you can do, kind of like what Martine did, I mean, she literally did practice sessions where she's got it down to 8 minutes that she can leave her house with her machine, supplies, and everything. I'm totally impressed, Martine. You're gonna have to like videotape that. We'll have to see what that looks like, right? But I do think
I would love to see that video.
I would love
think
to
that would
see
be
that too.
amazing. Your emergency drill, that would be so great.
I would love, Martine, where you're on record now to do that. But
I'll
I do
work on
think
it.
that I do think that it is an opportunity for patients to try to dialyze away from their home one day. It can help you prepare for travel, which is always fun and hopefully not an emergency. But B, it also does help you prepare if there is an emergency and you're just kind of like, what did I forget? I remember the first time I went away, I thought I had everything. I checked, blah, blah, blah. And I finally got there and I forgot saline, and I can't do a treatment literally without saline. So it is kind of a nice, it's a good exercise to try to pack that bag and pack your stuff, and just, it could be across the street at your neighbor. I don't know. It doesn't have to be literally so far away, but doing it in another space, maybe even in another room where you don't usually have your stuff, just try to practice that and get all your stuff together, because emergencies don't have to always be a snowstorm and a hurricane and wildfires. I mean, sometimes it's like a boiled water, and you can't use your water. There's an algae bloom or things that are going on. And so you want to know that you have options and you're prepared, and just kind of getting those pieces together, having the bag, and even trying to do it somewhere else will prepare you. And then maybe you can be like Martine and time yourself and see how quickly you can get out of the house.
Do any of you keep the stuff on hand for the 3-day emergency diet? And have you ever had to use it? Jesse's looking like he has never heard of a 3-day emergency diet. Have you heard of the 3-day emergency diet?
No.
I've heard of it.
Okay. Doesn't sound like it's getting much traction though. You would only use this diet if you were stuck in your house, can't get out, can't, get any more food, can't get dialysis. So like the power's out, you don't have any manual bags if you do PD. It's just a very low waste diet, as in it
Your body.
lets you not build up as many weights, and it's very limited in fluids. I will find you guys a link to that just in case, because it relies pretty heavily on packaged stuff that you could put in a bin and just like have in a basement, and then hopefully remember to use up before it, ages out. But
The KCER Go Bag document has some good food on the second page of it, an emergency dialysis diet plan.
cool. All right. Well, here's the 3-day emergency diet. I thought that the networks were like, the clinics were supposed to tell everybody about that, but it does not sound like it's something everybody's heard of. So it's not gourmet, shall we say. It's it's pretty restricted, but it's
Last time I looked at it, it was like a lot of jelly bean and like lollipop type stuff.
unless you have diabetes, in which case
Yeah.
that's a bad idea. But yeah, it's like, those little boxes of cereal and juice boxes and stuff like that. But it can be handy, and you can mix and match. And actually, if you really were stuck in your house with no power, you first would want to use up the fresh food that is in your refrigerator, and then the food that was in your freezer, and then you use the packaged food that isn't going to go bad, but because you don't want to throw out good food while you're eating packaged junk. So, but you
Well,
also
luckily
don't want to
we-
get food poisoning. So
Yeah.
that's a consideration too.
Luckily, we haven't had that, but I have heard of that diet before.
Yeah.
And I feel like my care team had given it to me a while ago. And it's probably a good idea to take a look at it again. And not only have the emergency stuff for your supplies, but maybe even some food. So I would have to take a look at that again, but I think you're bringing up a very good point.
Well, another thing to think about, and this was more of a travel than an emergency thing, but it kind of is the same sort of deal. If for folks who do nocturnal hemo and do it multiple nights a week, so they're used to getting a lot of dialysis, switching to less dialysis, going in center in an emergency, or going to fewer days a week, or going to shorter treatments, means you have to also switch your diet. Because if you are used to not having any limits, and that can be true for some folks on PD as well, you know, if you don't really have potassium limits because your labs tend to be pretty good and you can do all your exchanges and, you know, it's no big deal. If you can't do as many exchanges, or, you know, you just can't get as much dialysis, you got to cut back on the potassium. People have died not doing that. You know, just like, oh, I'm on vacation, I'm in Florida. Yeah, I'm just dialyzing 3 days a week when normally it was 6 nights a week, but I'm going to have that orange juice anyway. And at least one person did not live through that. And that's completely preventable. I think that dietitians aren't always thinking about what it means to switch from a lot of dialysis to a lot less, but it's important.
Yeah, you're bringing up good points, you know,
Yeah.
you really are bringing up good points, because diet is very effective in our everyday life. And if you're doing nocturnal dialysis or daily dialysis and all of a sudden now you're not, you really do need to think about your diet.
And fluids. If
Mhm.
you're not still making urine and you're going from a lot of dialysis to less dialysis, you also need to cut back on the fluid until you can get back to your usual schedule. Things people learn the hard way that other people don't have to learn the hard way if they hear the stories of the people who learn them the hard way. I never forgot that story.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Well,
It
I feel
was.
like we went over, you know, are there other things, Dory, that you think we should talk about? And
I
make sure I
mean,
saw
we-
somebody put a comment in about, have we ever gone through an emergency?
That was my comment.
Oh, that was you.
I was just asking folks to see if other folks.
Oh, I was
Yeah.
like, oh, they must have missed Martine.
Yeah.
But yeah, are there other comments or pieces you think we should share? And guys, if you're on the line there, if you're on Facebook land, or if you are a participant on Zoom, you can put some comments in, and we're here to answer your questions between HHD, PD. We've got a clinical nurse on. I think there's a lot.
We have puppies.
And we have puppies in the background, not being very good.
Yeah, I mean, we have a few more minutes if folks want to ask questions or share their experiences. And if not, we can wrap up a little bit early. So it's totally up to y'all. Now I feel like singing the Jeopardy music. Do, 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 do. Thank you.
Bueller.
Well, I have a question for Lyndsay as we kind of wrap it up. So Lyndsay, as someone like on the clinician side, how do you, so I know that we all kind of prepare, if you will, for emergencies, but when somebody's been on for, let's say, a year, 2 years, like, what is the industry standard, or what do you guys do as a provider to make sure that people are ready for an emergency? Is there a teach back? Is there something they need to fill out? Like, how do you know, or what is the industry standard that you know that your patients are prepared?
Absolutely. So we definitely teach emergency preparedness initially during your first experience to home dialysis training, or if you change modalities, we're talking emergency prevention. And then I find it best practice to repeat that information on a quarterly basis, to have that print off of your information, your medication, your prescription, who your doctor is, that phone number. That's really important to share on a quarterly basis. And then also at least every 6 months to do that performance practice, whether you're showing that you are a cycler patient and you can do manuals competently, safely. That's a big piece. And maybe a home visit or working with your care team to talk about your cycler, your next stage cycler, and making sure that you are still good to use bags. You remember how to use bags and how to set up the green lines and those pieces. I think that on a 6-month basis is really good, and it keeps it fresh. I also, along with what Jessie was saying, really support having something tangible to have at home. That trifold is great, or if you're a step-by-step kind of person, or if you have your iPad and you have all of your training materials on your iPad, then you have a reference point to go back to if you need that reference tool. I think that that's really important to have for many different situations. There's the emergency preparedness and during an emergency, but also if you're a PD patient on the cycler and you need to have a new cycler overnighted to you, and they can't get it to you overnight, and they say, well, it's going to be 48 hours. Next thing you know, there's an ice storm and the truck has something happen. Knowing how to do manuals keeps you out of the hospital, keeps you out of in-center, and keeps you independent. Yeah. So I think that practice at least every 6 months is a really good idea.
That is a good idea. Marcia Harris said she's in Southern California and she has Southern California Edison as her utility company, and they provided her with a solar generator for backup.
Nice.
A, I've never heard of a utility company giving anybody a generator, and B, I didn't even know there was such a thing as a solar generator.
That's fantastic.
That's amazing. And actually,
right?
She's bringing up a very good point. Marcia, thank you for saying this, because as dialysis patients, you should absolutely be telling your electric company that you are a dialysis patient. And as a matter of fact, usually your healthcare provider writes like a note on your behalf, and they send it over to your electric company and water, all the utilities that you need, that states that so-and-so is a dialysis patient. Should the power go out, should the water go out, that you need to be one of the first people to be back on the grid. And I know that my healthcare team has done that for me. And what I try to do every year is actually call the company myself and just remind them, I'm here. I just want you to know if anything happens, please remember I'm a dialysis patient. You might also want to do that even with your local paramedics, letting them know you're a dialysis patient. This is your location. Should anything happen or you get a 911 from this location, that they know who you are and they're prepared to come to you. So there is some kind of things that you can do as a patient to be prepared. So it's not only having, your extra supplies, checking to have an extra prescription, checking on the dates, being prepared should you have to do manual or change your prescription, but there's also preemptive things that you can do, like calling the electric company, the water company, the paramedics, and working with your healthcare team to get those letters delivered timely. And it should be done yearly. They have people come in and out, new people in and out. So you want to make sure. As a matter of fact, last winter, we had a storm here in the Northeast that everybody lost power for like 3 days. And you don't want to be calling your electric company, like Dory said, at that time to be like, hey, don't forget about me. So preemptively calling them before the season and giving little reminders is super important.
Yeah, and don't call 911 to do that. Call their non-emergency number to do that.
Yes.
Molly said Vanessa is absolutely correct. Ask your dialysis team social worker for assistance with completing the form for medical necessity. Use of home dialysis. So that's what you want to say is, I have a medical necessity need for power. Most electric utility companies have a form that can be completed and signed by a social worker, nurse, or nephrologist for this. So if that hasn't been done in your case and you are home doing PD or home HD, it's really important to do that.
Yeah, and ask, because I think a lot of patients might just not even know.
Right.
So, take a minute to ask, was that form filled out? And you can ask for a copy of it for your files. And you have to be your own advocate. So just make sure that you have that stuff, and the team is there to help you. And so sometimes it's just asking and making sure that those things are done.
Oh, Molly says also the electric company itself may ask for a letter. So versus, you just calling up and saying, hey, I'm a dialysis patient. Yeah, sure you are, lady. You just want your power back on faster.
Yeah.
They may want some
helpful.
proof in the form of a letter from your clinic saying, yes, you really are a dialysis patient. All right. Any other questions, or we will wrap up. As you know, we recorded this session. We will make the recording available so that y'all can watch it again, so that people who weren't able to be here tonight with us can see it later. So you can refer your friends to it if you thought it was super helpful and they missed it, whatever, it'll be there soon. Doesn't take too long to get those. Any closing words from y'all?
Well, I just want to thank you so much for hosting these live Facebook webinars. I think for patients, they're so important to know that you have a care team that can help you, but also how are you going to prepare should an emergency come? And listening to Martine's story that was in an emergency, and Jessie, how he's able to work his CAPD when he travels or if there's an emergency. Having Lyndsay on the line that was able to offer all this like clinician background and information. I think, Dory, like you're doing such a wonderful service for our patient community. And I want to just take a moment to thank you and the behind the scenes, Christy, for getting all of this together. It's really always a pleasure to work with you guys.
Well, thank you all for being here and sharing your experiences and making this way more relevant to people than just like my yakking, because nobody did. This was great fun. These conversations are just, I think they're just a really fun way to, share some useful information, get people thinking maybe about things that they haven't been thinking about. Because, until an emergency happens, then all of a sudden it's super urgent, but it's way better to think about it at least a little bit ahead of time. Get your go bag, get your papers together. When we've got plenty of resources, we've linked to some, there's some on the Facebook page. So thank you all for coming and for the helpful comments. And I hope you have a wonderful night